Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne-pestana, and our special guest today is Amy Newmark. And she's here to share with us the new Chicken Soup for the Soul book, Navigating Eldercare and Dementia, 101 Stories for Family Caregivers. Now, Amy is the best-selling author, editor-in-chief, and publisher of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series. Since 2008, she has published over 133 new books, most of them national bestsellers in the U.S. and Canada, more than doubling the number of Chicken Soup for the Soul titles in print today. She's also the author of Simply Happy, a crash course in Chicken Soup for the Soul advice and wisdom that is filled with easy-to-implement practical tips for a better life. So let's welcome to the show, Amy Newmark.
Well, thanks for having me on, and I'm excited about talking about this topic, which is near and dear to my life because I have a 92-year-old father with dementia who's in a memory unit.
Oh my goodness. I think everyone knows somebody that's touched by this or that's in elder care. Was that the main inspiration behind writing this one?
Well, it's not just my own life. So many of the people who write stories for us write about caring for their own elderly family members or family members with dementia. And so we know there's something like 30 million Americans who are close, like who are in caregiving families where it might be, a grown child, but it's still their grandmother who's in, memory care and they see their parents struggling with it. So we know that there are tens of millions of Americans who are directly impacted by elder care, sometimes with dementia and sometimes without. And even when it's without, sometimes you still have the issues of faultier judgment regarding handling finances or trying to take the car away from somebody who doesn't have dementia, but just doesn't have the reflexes anymore. So we know it's an issue that basically affects everyone at some point in their lives. And what I found was that by reading all these Chicken Soup for the Soul stories in the past, I was prepared when it came to be my time to enter into this kind of uncharted territory. I was ready because I had read all of this great advice from all of our storytellers. So that's why I wanted to make this new Chicken Soup for the Soul collection about helping people navigate this whole world of elder care and dementia.
There are so many difficult conversations that we have to have at some point. Are you finding that a lot of people are having the same questions about how to go about doing this?
The experiences are pretty much the same. The people whose parents don't have dementia are still dealing with the issues of how do I get my parent to let me have power of attorney or at least signing rights to the account or some kind of supervisory rights to the account? How do I take the car away or at least get my parent to stop driving at night? How do I get my parents to move to assisted living because my father is still climbing a ladder and trying to fix things on the roof and he's 87 and shouldn't be doing that. I mean, even before my father had dementia, I remember one time he decided to plow the driveway himself with his tractor, and he ended up deciding to then plow the road for the neighbors. And then he ended up with the tractor, stuck in a ditch down on the road. And then he had to walk up the steep driveway and hire somebody to rescue the tractor. And this was before dementia. But, there's all these issues that you deal with. And then when the dementia comes along, which it does come along for about half of people over age 85, then you have a whole additional set of problems to deal with and emotional issues and, the emotional turbulence of dementia. So I am just so filled with advice for people and tips from everything I've learned from my own life and from reading all of these stories. So it's all packed into this book now to help people, because here's the problem. When you start doing it, you have never done it before. And then when you finish and you're never going to have to do it again, well, now you're an expert. So we need to have all of those people who are experts share their expertise with the next people coming up, 5 or 10 years behind them.
There's so much on this topic that we're basically walking together through when it comes to elder care. If we're trying to have a discussion with someone that we love, that perhaps now's the time that they shouldn't drive anymore. I know that can be a very challenging discussion because in many ways that's a loss of freedom.
Oh, it really is a difficult talk. Absolutely. And you start out with that where you're trying to get your elderly parent or maybe your spouse to accept the reality that first he or she can't drive at night, then he or she can't drive at all, then he or she can't climb that ladder. Um, you start taking away what makes them feel like adults. And, all of a sudden they feel like they've been made back into a child and you're in charge of things. And so that's so tough. And then as things get worse and your loved one has dementia, well, you have to accept this new reality that this is not the same person you used to know. And their memories are not the memories that you know to be true, right? And so part of it is as you go down this rabbit hole of dementia, you have to start accepting that your loved one's reality is not the reality that you have, but you need to go and join your loved one in his or her reality. So I remember joining my father in his reality where he would tell me things and I would just nod my head and act very interested. And your first inclination is to say, no, that didn't happen. And then later you learn, wait, it makes no difference. You don't need to correct the person. If your parent thinks that he was a Vietnam War superhero and received the Medal of Honor, then go with it. What difference does it make? If your elderly mother thinks that your father is still alive and he's just parking the car, why remind her over and over again that he's already gone? Let her think he's just parking the car because she's going to forget in 5 minutes anyway. So there's a lot of adjustment of attitude that, we middle-aged people have to make when we're helping somebody who's older and is on this journey. You really learn a lot about forgiveness and you learn to be more flexible and more patient. And my husband, now my father isn't able to talk on the phone anymore, but for years he was. And my husband would hear just my side of the conversation. And he would say, I cannot believe how patient you are. I heard your side. I know your father was just making things up and you were going with it. Or sometimes we'd be in a loop where my father would literally ask me the same question, 30 times in 30 minutes. And I would just answer it 30 times in 30 minutes because he didn't remember that a minute before we had had the exact same conversation. But you get to the point where you realize, hey, I'm going to spend 30 minutes on this phone call. What difference does it make how I spend that 30 minutes? I'm spending the 30 minutes creating joy for the person on the other line of the call. Or I'm spending an hour in this visit agreeing with everything that this person says, because for that 1 hour, I'm providing joy to this person, even though he or she might forget that you visited 2 seconds after you leave their room. You might not get credit for the visit, but you at least created joy for that 1 hour of that person's life. So you really do learn patience, acceptance. It's a little view into what your own future could bring. So you treat the person the way you hope you'll be treated in the future if you end up with the same fate. So it's really interesting. I think the people who've gone on this elder care journey do come out of it as improved human beings because we have learned so much about acceptance and patience and forgiveness and just being flexible.
There is so much there for us to learn. And, I was real impressed with chapter 4 that discusses strategies and tips for coping. A lot of times caregivers put themselves kind of on the back burner and they don't really take care of themselves. I was real impressed with this chapter.
Yeah, we share a lot of tips in this book. It's a very tip and advice-oriented Chicken Soup for the Soul book. Some of our books are extremely entertaining, and then some are really passing along great advice because the people who have already been on this path really want to share their advice because otherwise it's just wasted. We have all this knowledge we want to share. So like one of our stories in that book, in that chapter was by Morgan St. James, who's actually a really good writer, and I've seen her work all over the place. And she wrote about how she created a memory book for her mom who has dementia because her mom would keep asking her the same questions over and over again. And I remember making a poster for my father, the same idea, where they know people, but they can't figure out anymore who's in their family and what their roles are. So you need to make them a poster or a book or something that shows like a picture and say, this is, the dog, and give the dog's name. And this is your grandson. And maybe you make a family tree, but you help them to relearn all of this stuff because they're so confused. And so Morgan made this memory book for her mom, and her mom loved it and carried it around the assisted living where she was. And then a lot of the other residents wanted copies of it, but then of course they were taking on Morgan's family as their own. So then she got the assisted living to suggest to the family members of the other residents that they make their own books because everybody thought they were related to Morgan and her family after a while. But it was a great idea, and it's something that I did. And then another one of the tips in chapter 4 was by Brenda Leppington, who she wrote a whole story about this idea that I mentioned already about not correcting the incorrect memories and just going with them. And in Brenda's case, her mom would sometimes be aware enough to say to her, I know my cat is dead, but I don't really want to think that way. I'd rather pretend that my cat is still alive. So Brenda bought her one of those, like they have these animated stuffed animals that you can get. They have dogs and they have cats. And what Brenda did was she gave it to her mom originally when her mom knew that it wasn't a real cat. But then over time, it became real to her mom. And it kept her mom company. And she tried to feed the cat. And she would ask people, what they thought of how the cat was doing. And then when Brenda would call her mom, they would discuss how the cat was doing. And she realized it was just better to let her mom go there. Her mom used to read old letters from her siblings who were long gone, but her mom would read the letters to Brenda as if they had just been sent by her brothers. And her mom got so much pleasure from reading the news from her brothers who had been gone for a long time, but this brought them back to life for her mother. And sometimes when people have dementia, they do realize it, but then they don't really want to think about it. Like I saw my father a few weeks ago, and he said, I don't have any memories. And it was so sad because all of a sudden he realized that they were all gone. And I almost thought, how does that feel? It's like you're in a boat in an ocean with no rudder and you're just floating around and there's nothing to grab onto. And that's sad when that happens. You're better off when people don't realize it and they're in this alternate universe where all kinds of good things are happening and all their loved ones are still surrounding them and they have stories to tell. That's really better. So after a while as a family member, you start to really love the alternate reality because it's so much more pleasant than the actual reality.
It can be so heartbreaking to see this process take place and unfold in front of us. And I know in your book you talk about blessings and gratitude. And I think a lot of times people who look at this stage in life, which we'll all encounter someday, have a hard time identifying any blessings or anything to be grateful for.
There are so many. For example, in the case of my father, he used to be pretty tough. And if somebody didn't serve him right away in a restaurant, he would complain. And he always had complaints about different things. And then when the dementia started, he would tell everybody he was a lawyer, which was true. And he was going to sue them and this and that. And then what happens is as the dementia goes on, sometimes it strips off whatever hard shell is around the person and it reveals this really lovely person underneath. That's what happened with my father. The hard shell fell off and underneath was this man who says, I love you, and is grateful and sees the blessings in his life and looks at a tree and looks at the sunlight and talks about how beautiful it is and appreciates all the little things and lives in the present moment. And so that happens. And a lot of people also reported in our book that their parents or their spouses all of a sudden became joiners and started participating in activities at the memory unit or at the assisted living and really blossomed into a new person. I mean, there was a story by Linda O'Connell, who writes for us a lot, and they put her mom into an assisted living, and her mom completely changed. And she was first protesting. She didn't want to move into this place. Actually, it was an independent living, so even more independent than an assisted living. And she said, I'm not going to join and I'm not going to do anything. And then it turned out that she loved it and she was secretly joining every activity and having so much fun. And the other secret was that she figured out that by being in the independent living, she could call family members and have them come and visit her. And she scheduled them so they never overlapped with each other. So the family members had no idea that they'd been visiting her constantly. I mean, one day she had two different family members come who each drove her to McDonald's. She went twice in one day. and Linda says in her story that her mom was a late bloomer who was like a lovely wild rose that finally blossomed in her elder years. So there are so many stories in our book in which older people moved to an assisted living or an independent living and had a great social life, had so much fun, or even in memory units. Like one man felt really bad because he put his wife into a memory unit and he felt guilty about it. And she was fairly nonverbal. But then one day she said to him, and this happens all the time, that somebody who's nonverbal or appears to be very non-lucid all of a sudden comes to and you have a whole conversation. And she said to her husband, after not speaking to him for months, I love it here. This is my home. I really enjoy it. And thank you so much for renting this place for me and having me live here. And he felt so good after all those months of feeling guilty.
It's so important to really understand how to communicate, I think, better with, just our elders as we get older too. When you were doing your research for this book, I know you're so well read on this topic and you know a lot. Was there anything that surprised you?
I think I was only surprised in the beginning. I mean, I remember reading that book. What was it called? Still Alice, something like that. I remember reading that early on before my father had dementia and being so shocked. And of course, now I don't think anything would shock me at all. But I did read a lot about dementia and elder care. And now having published so many Chicken Soup for the Soul stories about it, including this book about navigating elder care and dementia, I don't think anything is really going to surprise me anymore. But there are some surprising things that I think people should know about, and they're really worth knowing about ahead of time. So here's one that I think is incredibly important, and I've said this over and over to my brother and my sister because all three of us are involved with my father's care and with visiting him. There are a lot of people who seem to have really advanced dementia, don't seem to know anything, don't seem to be understanding what they're being told during visits, etc. Sometimes out of the blue, and it's often right near the end of their lives, they become totally lucid. And all of a sudden you realize that all those years they were listening and absorbing, and they'll ask questions like, well, so how did it go with the college application that Junior made to the state university? And you're thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that he was listening. And so it's a really good warning. Like, keep talking to the person. It's not a waste of your time. Inside, your loved one is listening and understanding. And boy, would you feel bad if they came out lucid at some point and you realized, oh my gosh, all those things I was saying right in front of this person, he or she was understanding. So that was something that I thought was super important to share. And we have a number of stories in the book about somebody becoming lucid after a long period of seeming to be unresponsive. Another thing that happens is there's some really cool coping strategies that the people with dementia use that should not be discouraged at all. For example, one woman wrote about how her husband, who got early onset Alzheimer's, I mean, really only in middle age, he became friends with his reflection. And he thought his reflection was a man older than him because he thought he looked 20 years younger than he did. So the man in the mirror looked 20 years older to him. But that was his new friend. And he spends hours talking to his friend in the mirror. And I've seen that a lot in Chicken Soup for the Soul stories, these unusual social lives that people with dementia can create for themselves. So that was really cool. One more thing that I thought was very, very important to emphasize is self-care, because people make all these sacrifices. And we all have heard, put your oxygen mask on first and all of that, but the self-care is really important. So we have a whole chapter about self-care. And in my case, it seemed selfish. When my mother died, and I knew my father had dementia, and I knew my father was going to start calling me at 3 every morning, I went and unplugged my home phone line. I went down to the basement and unplugged my home phone line, and I kept it unplugged for 4 months until I could get my home phone line out of my father's speed dial. Because you have to take care of yourself. You're no good to your family member if you are going without sleep and you're stressed and, not healthy, not exercising, not eating properly. So we do have a whole chapter about self-care because of how important it is for everyone in the family, for the caregiver to take care of himself or herself.
What lesson do you think we really need to learn that you present in the book that's like one that really sticks with you?
I guess the lesson is that people live their lives in phases. And so you just have to accept that someday it's going to be your turn. You're either going to be the caregiver for somebody who's elderly and possibly has dementia on top of being elderly, or you're going to be that person. And it's a normal progression. It's a normal part of life. And I think the more you're exposed to it by reading about it, the more you can accept it gracefully and in a constructive manner when it happens. I know in my case, when I finally realized what was going on with my father, I did a lot better because of my exposure to Chicken Soup for the Soul stories. And we had a prior book about Alzheimer's we put out in 2014. And we also had a book for family caregivers that we had put out in, I think, 2013. And so I had been exposed to it already. And so when it happened, instead of feeling sorry for myself or being overly concerned, I just thought, okay, it's my turn now. Because when you realize that tens of millions of people are going through this, you can have a better attitude and never even go down the path of feeling sorry for yourself. You just kind of shoulder the burden, learn as much as you can about it, and proceed. And then, as you mentioned before, there are blessings and silver linings, and there are things to be grateful for. And so if you go into it thinking, there are going to be some good moments that come from this also. There's going to be some funny moments. There are going to be some great memories created. It's just, how we accept babies and what they go through and all that babyhood and all the care, and this is a normal part of life. Well, it's the same thing at the other end. There's a time when people need a lot of care, and it's part of the natural progression of life. And so I think accepting it and not feeling sorry for yourself is very important.
I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us because, gosh, that's such great information. And I love how in your book you talk about how it takes a village. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, because people, and this goes back to self-care, people sometimes don't spread out the burden enough. I mean, there was one person, and sometimes somebody has to say something to you that's just, you just have to hear the words at the right time, even if the words seem incredibly simple, but if they hit you at the right time, it makes a difference. And one woman was just destroying her own health, trying to take care of her children and her family, and then the elderly parents as well. And somebody said to her at the hospital, you're juggling too many balls. You have to hand some of the balls to somebody else. Well, that image of all the balls that she was juggling, and then thinking, okay, I've got all, 8 balls I'm juggling. So she had this mental image of all the balls. And this person at the hospital said to her, just take 3 of those balls and hand them to somebody else. That mental image really worked for her. And she handed them off and discovered that her spouse and her children would help her. And you just have to ask. I mean, we have stories in here about families getting together. You hear people talking about, oh, my sister doesn't do anything or my brother doesn't do anything. Well, you have to really look at what each person's strength is and just go for that. And so we had a great story from Marsha Porta in the chapter that's called It Takes a Village. And she was one of 4 daughters. And what they decided to do when they were caring for their elderly parents, was look at the unique skill set that each one had. So instead of complaining that one of them, only wants to do the money side of things, but never will actually, drive to a doctor's appointment. Well, instead just say, okay, you're going to do all of the money stuff. So what they did was one daughter was an excellent cook. So she took on the task of bringing meals to her mother's house, and her mom loved that. And the whole family would get together to eat the meals. Another one of the daughters wanted to be the visiting daughter. So she would go and visit her mom and sit with her for hours and listen to her stories. And not all the daughters had the time to do that. Then another daughter was great at finances and business. So she took over all of the legal and business headaches. And there was a lot to take care of. And so that was what she did to contribute. So none of the other sisters had to worry about that. So you had a cook, you had somebody who would go and sit and listen to the stories, and you had somebody who would handle all the financial stuff and all the paperwork. And then Marcia said her skill set was being a healer. She was the one who was willing to do medical things. And so her mom had these awful, swollen, seeping legs that needed daily bandage changes, and no one else wanted to do that. So Marcia took that on. That was a huge contribution that she could make among the four sisters. And so she said that as a group, her sisters and she made her mom's life so much better. And none of them could provide the same things as each other, but each of the different skill sets they had came together miraculously to complete this wonderful set of caregivers. And then there was another family where there was a dad who was widowed, and they had all female offspring in the family. So there were 3 daughters and there were 4 granddaughters. Well, the 7 females all took care of the elderly father/grandfather. And so they divided up the week, and each girl or grown woman would take one day of the week. And on that day, she would call the elderly relative once in the morning, once in the evening, and chat, and then report to everybody else. And they just each took one day out of 7. And it worked out really, really well for them because they stayed on top of what was going on with their father. He felt very well cared for. And so people just have to be flexible. And I think that's something also that siblings really have to learn to do, is be flexible about who's going to do what and appreciate what strength each sibling brings to the totality of the care.
My goodness, Amy, I always love the books that you bring. All the Chicken Soup for the Soul books are just amazing. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about these great books?
So our website, chickensoup.com, is just overflowing with information. And if you go there, you can click on our podcast and you can listen to the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast, where I share these stories from this book about elder care and dementia and from our other new books. You can also sign up for our daily newsletter. You'll get a free story in your email every single day, including stories from this book. There's just a wealth of information at chickensoup.com. You can find all kinds of things there in addition to more information about this book.
Well, Amy, it's been great to spend this time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. It's so much fun to spend, a good 30 minutes discussing my newest baby, my newest book. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. It has been an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about the new Chicken Soup for the Soul book, Navigating Elder Care and Dementia, 101 Stories for Family Caregivers. Now, Chicken Soup for the Soul book series is available everywhere you buy books. That would be Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can get them at your indie retailers, which of course we want to support our indie bookstores. And also you can find them at chickensoup.com for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.